Of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.
Okay then, welcome to Engage for Success Radio and show number 614 in our weekly series. Engage for Success is a not-for-profit movement and the UK's leading voice on the topic of employee engagement. We're out there raising awareness and running events for our area networks right around the country. And our topic and sector-specific thought and action groups are developing research, publishing case studies, and highlighting all the best practice that's going on out there. So to find out more, please visit engageforsuccess.org. And while you're there, why not sign up for our weekly newsletter, which will mean you'll never miss out on any of our excellent free resources, events, and updates. And I'm Andy Gorham, your host for today's show and the founder of BizJuicer, the employee engagement and culture change consultancy that helps growing organizations become stickier from the inside out by helping them attract, keep, and develop great people. So today we're exploring a topic that I know is close to many hearts out there, but is still often, I think, quite misunderstood in the workplace, and that is neuro-inclusion. Too often, neurodivergent individuals are maybe seen as problems to solve rather than the powerful assets whose unique strengths can actually help teams innovate, think differently, and perform better. But inclusion isn't just about awareness and the right policy updates. It's about culture, leadership, and everyday behaviors that benefit everyone. So what does true neuro-inclusion look like? And how can leaders build environments where neurodivergent individuals, and indeed actually everyone, can thrive? Well, to help us unpack this today, I'm delighted to be joined by Clare Kenny, a leadership and culture consultant who's worked with organizations including Channel 4, KPMG, and Burberry, amongst others. Now, Clare brings not only a professional lens to this conversation, but also very personal, own lived experience of ADHD. Now, together, I hope we'll explore what genuine inclusion feels like, why perhaps psychological safety matters more than ever, and how supporting neurodivergent employees and their colleagues can transform the workplace for better. Clare, welcome to the show. It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, me too. I mean, this is a topic that is, I don't know whether it is getting louder and louder or whether we're just more familiar hearing it, but it certainly seems like it's now firmly on the radar in many, many places, but maybe not properly understood by everybody. So I'm really interested to unpack this with you, and you've got a very, very interesting story. So let's maybe start there. Prior to your own diagnosis, I mean, you've built a career helping organizations in leadership and culture, but since your own experience with neurodivergence, has that given you a different focus, additional focus? How's that shown up in the work that you tend to do today? Why don't you just bring us up to speed with what's going on, Clare?
Yeah, sure. So I've always worked in learning and development leadership consultancy pretty much my entire career, but the first half of my career was very much from a client-focused project management side of it in terms of kind of implementing these projects. And the second half of my career was more once I had navigated some lived experiences myself. I'd had a lot of experience with anxiety, addiction, and then I lost my mum quite suddenly when I was probably at the peak of working in a toxic environment, feeling really burnt out, just sort of keeping it all together.
Wow.
And it felt like one of those almost cliche moments where I went, what on earth am I doing with my life? Am I happy? Am I just doing this because I felt like this is what I should do? I'm always kind of pushing to the next level, but without really thinking about whether I was happy and whether it was what I really wanted to do for myself. So that's when I started moving more into the consultancy area and saying that there's lots of different people need different things from their workplace, but a lot of the time the conversations I was having again and again were just, I just get through work and then I recover from it. And actually the real expectation and almost acceptance that work sucks, and that you just have to get on with it, and that if someone has a job that you enjoy, it's actually really, really the anomaly. It's not something that you can expect. And so that was what really helped me think about what is it that we can do in our organizations. And often I think people think you need to do these really big bells and whistles, high budget, high PR things, when I know more often than less, people just want their boss to understand a bit better, to be a bit kinder, to be a bit more supportive, to be a bit more flexible. And that stuff is behavioral change. It's not big
Yeah.
budget stuff. So that for me, it's more about what can we do day to day? What's the ways of working? How are our leaders behaving? And that could be from so many different lenses of lived experience, or you could be someone who on paper is doing fine, has no struggles or challenges, but that doesn't mean that every day is easy in any shape or form. There are going to be times when you're feeling fantastic, there's going to be times when you're feeling dreadful, and how can you be sure that you're being able to show up to work and be supported in the ways that you need, and be able to be proactively having the conversations to spot when perhaps a little bit more support is needed, or you need a little bit more of a conversation, rather than it waiting until everyone hits that crisis point and then trying to deal with it in a more reactive way.
But it's difficult, isn't it? Because there's so much masking going on with the individual themselves, who are trying to, inverted commas, fit in,
Yeah.
and sort of just like you sort of described, just get along. And that then projects to somebody else that, oh, everything's okay, that they're getting on, they're doing stuff. No one is really understanding what's going on. And look, this isn't just about neurodiversity. This particular, we're all dealing with lots of different things that
We've
some
all
of
got
us
our
choose
masks.
to,
Yeah.
exactly. Some of us choose
Yeah.
to share, others choose to wear the mask and just like keep it to ourselves. I think it's particularly interesting nowadays, where maybe the whole neurodiversity debate has opened up the kind of larger conversation to what you sort of said about, actually, I think we want to be seen, heard, and showed how we add value at work, and that takes a bit of, well, a bit of understanding, a bit of a conversation, a bit of a
Yeah.
relationship. God forbid, even build rapport. All these sorts of things are going to be needed. You know, you talked about big budget stuff. It's not about pounds. It's about perseverance and
Yeah.
conversation, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think there's a risk, I think, with anything, and I think especially I can see this with neurodiversity, is going, can someone come in and please explain to us what's autism, what's ADHD, how can we spot the signs, how can we do things to support different people in different pigeonholes? And actually, the more that we're trying to give everybody a label and say, right, okay, you have a certain you're neurodivergent in this way, and therefore you need X, Y, and Z, and this is what we're going to offer you, that completely misses the entire point, which is that every human being has different things to offer. They have different passions, they have different skills, they have different challenges, they have different trigger points, whether you're neurodivergent or not neurodivergent. And actually, what are we doing to create a culture where we can support people better, and we create an open dialogue, so that we're not trying to prescribe what everyone needs. We're creating an environment that means people feel empowered to say what they need. And that's the difference. That's the flip, rather than going, well, let's do a policy about this and supporting this and tools around this, going, actually, do you feel safe enough to say this works for me or this doesn't work for me?
I think that whole conversation is really interesting. We had a chat earlier, and I remember talking to Chris Hood from Neurobridge about a very similar topic. And the kind of light bulb for me in that conversation is just what you've sort of said. Actually, if someone has taken a diagnosis, or receives rather a diagnosis, and is actually then the next step brave enough to come forward, or feel confident enough to come forward and start talking about that to their employer, manager, colleague, my initial kind of helpful stance is, okay, so what do you need then to make everything okay? And the result is, for many people going through this, I haven't got a clue what I need. I don't know. I've been masking and running away from this stuff and trying to deal with it for ages. I have no idea at this point what I need to help. What I do need is for you to understand, listen, and,
Mhm.
and for us to kind of work together.
Yeah.
I think I said it in the introduction, which is taken from your work. Neurodiversity, neurodivergent individuals, they're not a problem to solve.
Mhm.
They're, I guess, they're a potential to release
Yeah.
ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and this was something that we were talking about earlier, is that we, in many organizations, the way that we work, the way that we have meetings, the way that we gather feedback is really set up for certain types of thinking. Often
Mm,
those people who are active thinkers, who are able to speak out loud in the moment, have the confidence to do that, which means that again and again and again, those are the voices that you hear the most. Those are the voices that leadership see and recognize and reward and then promote within an organization. Whereas actually that's only one way of thinking, and that
mm,
doesn't necessarily have to be neurodivergent thinking. It could be someone who's more introverted, someone who needs time to reflect, someone who's actually better in the written word than they are speaking out loud. And by simple tools, really simple tools, like instead of saying, right, well, we're going to have a meeting where a senior person goes, does anyone have any questions or thoughts? Nope. Okay, fine. And moves off saying, I'm going to set up a Slido, or I'm going to send an email out so that you can reflect and send your thoughts back anonymously, or you can
mm.
send them back in a few days. Just by creating processes for everybody, you're then being more inclusive to all the different types of ways in which people think. And then you're not putting that pressure on an individual who's saying, I've just received this diagnosis, I actually have no idea how you can help me. You're saying we're just creating a more inclusive environment for all different ways of thinking.
Yeah,
And that knock-on effect is that it will help you, it will benefit you.
we don't have to necessarily attach the label to it.
No.
I guess that, and that's not dismissing. I certainly wouldn't want to be accused of dismissing the I guess the issues associated with neurodivergent thinking
Hmm.
for people. But I think the point I think you're trying to make, as I understand it, is actually this is about recognizing a whole bunch of skills, a whole
Yeah.
bunch of ways of thinking, a whole bunch of ways of communicating, so that everybody has the opportunity. Everybody has the same opportunity.
Yeah.
You're leveling that playing field for contribution.
Yeah. And that you often don't realize how many people you benefit by making certain changes. I remember watching a TED talk where she was talking about putting on captions so that people can read captions. And that helps people who are hard of hearing, but it's actually incredibly helpful for someone with ADHD because of
Mm.
the way that you process information. And my entire life, I've watched things with subtitles, and I just assumed I was a bit deaf.
My
And
kids are
then
the
once,
same. My
yeah,
kids can't
but
do without them.
I cannot process. I can hear what they're saying, but it's like I cannot process it. And it's only being diagnosed a year ago and then learning more and more about it, you start to see so many things about the way your brain works that you're like, oh, okay. You just put it down to other things and you're like, oh, okay, this can actually be connected to this. And so it's almost like putting those captions up when on a team meeting, or when you're sharing content, that you might think you're doing it to help people who are hard of hearing, but the
Mm.
knock-on effect is you're probably helping lots of other people who have different processing issues, people whose English is their second language.
Yeah.
So you're never just including one type of person when you make these adjustments. You have such a ripple effect, and I think that is why it's so important to think about what are some of these things that we can just do as standard, and then you don't need someone to have an official diagnosis to benefit from them, because that brings up so many other questions and issues as well when you think about waiting times and the cost of things like diagnosis, that people who might identify and think of themselves as neurodivergent still get to benefit without having to come with an official piece of
Yeah.
paper and be saying, I want to get extra help. It's actually, you're just benefiting everyone.
And I guess as well, you're putting less, I guess, positively less of a spotlight on an
Hmm.
individual that we're having to adapt for an individual.
Yeah.
Now I can only imagine that would make people feel, in many cases, quite uncomfortable.
Yeah.
No one
Yeah.
wants necessarily be singled out. I just want to put the brakes on for a sec, because you've casually slipped in there that you're a year into your own
Mm.
diagnosis. So it would be rude of me not to sort of say, well, what's happened in that year, Claire? Because
Yeah.
I'm fascinated because I think there are a lot of people dealing with this stuff unbeknownst
Hmm.
to
Yeah.
themselves,
Yeah.
and I think it affects everybody differently. So when you got your diagnosis, what's happened since? Did you feel relief? Did you feel, well, Chris used the word shame
Hmm.
at one point, and guilt
Right.
within that sort of stuff as well. What was going through your mind, and what's happened as a result, Claire? If that's not too personal.
So I I had I had never ever considered ADHD, and
Mm,
especially as a woman, and I had the kind of specific ideas of what ADHD looked like, and I just couldn't resonate with those at all. And it was only after I had my daughter,
mhm.
and I felt like for a lot of ways in which a lot of my coping mechanisms, a lot of the processes I had in place to be able to deal with the way my brain worked,
Yep.
suddenly I couldn't do all of those anymore. I had this child. I wasn't able to be kind of consistently just sort of managing stuff the way I was, and things started to really feel like they imploded, and I just felt so overwhelmed and incredibly full of rage, so full of rage.
Mm,
And I started looking at content, talking to certain people, and starting to identify certain things, thinking, okay, maybe this is a route that I need to explore more. And also speaking to people who'd known me for a really long time, and saying, is this something that you think? And actually been given quite a lot of information about things that I did, or things that were important to me that I'd never connected with ADHD at all.
mm.
So when I went to get my diagnosis, I was really, really desperate to get it, because it was like, I can't, if this isn't ADHD, I can't, I cannot continue to live like this if someone just tells me this is just motherhood. I was
Oh,
like, I
oh gosh,
can't,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Like, please tell me this is
yeah.
not just normal. So I was really, really desperate to get the diagnosis. And then I did get the diagnosis. And then it just sort of felt like a bit of an anticlimax, because it was like, great, okay, I've got the diagnosis, but I still feel like this.
Yeah.
And I hear a lot of narratives of saying, oh, everything changes, everything makes sense, and you're like, well, uh, you are still unpicking so much about the way that you've kind of masked and coped, and the world is still set up in ways that don't work for you. So I didn't really resonate with that. I feel that feels far too simplistic, the idea that the world just suddenly makes sense. But I did. There's a couple of things I felt like, and I've used this phrase before, but like, those daytime TV ads where they say, oh, consolidate all of your debts
Oh,
into one
yeah.
manageable monthly payment. It felt like I was able to do that. I
Okay.
was like, I could consolidate all of these things that I thought about myself that seemed really ludicrous.
Mm,
And why do I do that? And why can't you do that? And why is it that you respond in that way, into something that made a sentence under one umbrella?
mhm.
So that helped me have a lot more self-compassion for myself. And the more you learn from as you go along, I'm going, oh my God, and that connects, and I can understand that, and I can see why that is that way. So I think it does help you have more self-compassion. It also helped me be more boundaried, because I I I burn out constantly, and
Mm.
neurodivergent burnout is a real. I find it really hard to have that balance and put those boundaries in place. But having a diagnosis helps you realize just how important they are and how non-negotiable they need to be, because it's not just a case of feeling a bit frustrated. It's like, this can be real survival if I don't put these right boundaries in place. So I think that it's helped me be less tolerant of some of that nonsense. And also, when it comes back to thinking about it from a
Mm.
workplace environment, as I work for myself and I have the flexibility to be able to do stuff, I've been able to think about how I need to work with my mind, my energy levels, my focus levels, and I will sometimes go, this week on Monday I'm going to do this, and Tuesday I'm going to do this, and Wednesday I'm going to do this. It's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And I've realised that I'm only setting myself up for disappointment and failure if I try and plan my work as if I don't have ADHD. So now it's going, okay, well, these are the things that have to happen this week, but we'll do them when we're in the zone to do them, and we'll do them when we feel like we want to do them, and we'll make sure that there's space for if we go off in a different direction, or we just cannot, executive dysfunction means we just cannot get into it, and being able to, I get all of that stuff done, but in perhaps a real roundabout way, that being in that 9 to 5 of saying you have to show up and you have to be at your desk and you need to be doing this and you need to be present and visible, versus me saying, well, right now, actually, I think the best thing for me is to go and have a walk and take myself away from this, and then maybe I'll work at 9 p.m. and catch up. It's I'm able to have that flexibility because I work for myself, but it's thinking about how can that be translated in a way that is gonna, because I don't think I would not be my best self. I would not have my best outputs. I would not be performing to the level I needed to if I couldn't work in that way. So it's not a case of just giving me that flex. It's about actually getting the best out of me and the best results out of me as well.
And that is interesting in itself, isn't it? Because you can give yourself the flexibility,
Yeah.
so if you so choose. But I guess there's a lot of people out there who are in slightly different circumstances within a bit more of a controlled environment,
Yeah.
or a more planned environment, whatever we want to call it. So I'm kind of interested to dig. I mean, this is such a short space of time to have a chat about this sort of stuff today, but I'm really interested to sort of hear about perhaps maybe some of the work you've done with some of your big clients, in terms of how they're adapting to this challenge, what sort of things that they're doing. I mean, we've mentioned Channel 4, KPMG, Burberry, guys you've worked with. What sort of steps have they taken going forward to recognize this sort of neuro-inclusion and start to perhaps, where people don't have the flexibility or as much flexibility as a hybrid worker or a remote worker?
Yeah.
What are they doing?
So I think, as I've mentioned before, you can't, especially when you've got the limitations of certain roles, it can't be a case of anyone do everything exactly how you need to do it, but it's thinking about what are some of the things that are actually going to shift the dial a lot, how sometimes a small bit of flexibility can make a massive difference to people's outputs, to people's engagement, to how they're feeling. So psychological safety is always a really great place to start in terms of thinking how are our leaders behaving, and what tools are they putting in place that means that people feel able and that they, and because often, and I've been in roles like this before, where you're working in a really inflexible way and you're working against yourself because you assume that's what's wanted of you. You assume if you work in a different way that it's going to be held against you, you're going to be penalized for that, when actually that might not even be the case, but it's because you don't feel psychologically safe, you don't feel able to have that conversation or push the boundary slightly. So how can leaders create an environment where people feel able to have that conversation and really understand what the expectations are? Because you might go, the expectations, this we don't mind about, and this is okay. We actually don't mind where you work from, or how you're dialing into stuff, but we always need you to be available for these hours. We know that it's really important that you're responding to clients within this SLA, so these things are non-negotiable and these things have got flex. And the more that people understand that and what those expectations are, the safer people feel, and that's going to kind of help people to feel more included and more supported. And then what are some of the tools that can be quite simple when it comes to communicating with your teams, having meetings, just leveraging the different types of ideas, thoughts, and brains in the room. And that can be simple things like, instead of in a meeting just expecting everyone to speak out loud, or expecting everyone to be able to come up with an answer on the spot, following up with a survey link and saying, we'd love to hear all of your thoughts here, or thinking about who isn't speaking up, who are the people in the room that aren't speaking up, and what might you need to do to understand a bit more about why that is, and not making assumptions about why that is, and being able to follow up in a way that matters, so that you can get. I think we often make real assumptions about the people that we have in the room, that people are either rude or they're unengaged or they don't know what they're talking about, when often it's because they think in a different way to us, and therefore they're kind of coming across in a different way to us. So creating that psychological safety is really important, and there's obviously lots of ways in which you can do that. But then thinking about what are some of the ways in which we want to gather feedback, the ways in which we want to communicate to people, that are going to help us leverage not just those people who are happy in the moment when you say any questions, any thoughts, to stand up and share, because that is only a small proportion of the people that you have in the room, and it means you're often missing out on so many ideas, so many great brains that I think that we just historically tend to miss out on, and that's a great shame.
I think so. I think this is where the parallels are interesting and potentially dangerous for me, because I'll probably make a statement that someone will get upset about. But I think this notion we've sort of talked about today about, look, recognizing the neurodivergence, thinking about neuro-inclusion, but actually trying to be less pointed about it and make it more of a general thing. This is, to me, where the interesting crossovers between something like behavior profile, the sort of, color work, all those sorts of things, I think is really interesting, because when you do color work with groups or teams, that one of the first questions weirdly nowadays you get is, oh, can this spot neurodivergence? And I'm
Right,
very quick
yeah.
to sort of say, well, no, it doesn't. We don't use it to spot neurodivergence. But what it does talk about is preferences for communication and preferences for how you work, or how you organize yourself, how you set yourself up for success. And that's interesting, because it cuts through the kind of, oh, you must have ADHD, or
Yeah.
you suffer from OCD, or, well, let's get away from those labels just for a sec and think about how you prefer to communicate, how you prefer to socialize or not with people, how you like to work, or because these can show up in behavior, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't need the other diagnosis to
No.
sort of have an affinity and an understanding and a recognition for how someone prefers to think, speak, communicate, whatever it might be.
And it can be, you risk being really generalizing then as well. And there's a phrase which is, if you've met one neurodivergent person, then you've met one neurodivergent person. and the assumption that if you've got that label, therefore then you know everything about someone. You wouldn't assume that. If you're like, oh, I've met a French person, so therefore you're French, I can make all of these assumptions and be able to extrapolate that. It's like I think often there can be such value and importance in labels for many reasons, but I think it sometimes gets in between that individual human connection of saying, okay, I see your label and therefore I make assumptions, rather than going, actually, what is it that you need as an individual, irrelevant of the labels that sit around you?
I think that's a great piece of advice. And as we sort of draw this to a close, this fleeting conversation, way too short for what this topic is deserving of. If there was one thing that you were going to sort of just sow the seed in someone's mind, thinking, listening to this, what would that be, to try and really hone in on this inclusive piece?
I think there's a simple question that you can ask people, and it doesn't matter whether they're neurodivergent, neurotypical, whatever their background and experience is. It's saying, what can I do to make you more comfortable? And helping people to think about that. And you can ask your teams that, you can ask individuals that, and it just helps people really reflect on what is working for me, what isn't working for me, and it stops you from being too prescriptive or getting too hung up on people having to have certain things to get certain things. It's saying, actually, what's working and what's not, and what can we do to get the best out of you and help you be as comfortable as you need to be in this working environment.
And which sounds like such a simple question and a simple conversation, and yet it's probably not common practice in lots of places. So we should definitely do that. Claire, before I let you go, By the way, thank you for coming in and sharing your insights and experiences with us today. Really, really helpful and useful for everybody. But if people would like to find out a little bit more about you and the work that you do, where should they go look?
Yeah, well, you can find me on LinkedIn, so you can look up Clare Kenny on LinkedIn, or my website, which is clarekenny.com, CLAREEKENNY.com, and you can find I do lots of free content, podcasts, blog posts, guides, so it's a good place to look if you're looking for some free content to read and learn more.
Beautiful. Well, thank you very much for that. And look, that's all we have time for today. So don't forget, go and visit engagesuccess.org and check out the show notes and explore all the free employee engagement resources that are there. And don't forget, you can download or stream any of the previous episodes at your leisure. We'll be back at the same time next week. I'm Andy Gorham, and thanks very much for listening to Engage for Success Radio.
Engage for Success Radio, raising the profile of employee engagement and shining a light on good practice for people who believe there's a better way to work.